Hello, I'm Macierewicz and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. Now, a special committee investigating alleged Russian influence in Poland has presented a report accusing the former Minister of Defense of, and I quote, diplomatic treason. Among these accusations, there are also questions of how Poland was conducting its preparations for the impending conflict in Ukraine. On the other hand, the opposition says this is simply a political witch hunt. So, is there enough evidence to actually confirm this? And what will be the consequences? Well, we're going to talk about this with our guest today, Piotr Kaczyński, EU expert from the Geremek Foundation. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
So first of all, let's explain the terms here. Diplomatic treason. What is this term in legal parlance, and also why was this actually included in this report? Where does it stem from, essentially?
Right. I mean, diplomatic treason stands from treason. Treason that a lot of people can kind of sense what it means. And diplomatic treason is a concept that is in the Polish penal code. And it refers to people who are representing the country vis-a-vis other countries, and then they are committing treason, so in their diplomatic functions. So this is why it was used as an accusation against Mr. Macierewicz yesterday.
What are the facts of the case?
The facts of the case that were mentioned yesterday include, for example, a situation that one of the NATO installations could have been based in Poland, but instead Macierewicz was against this, and then basically today this installation is in Germany.
So for the sake of clarity, we're talking about Antoni Macierewicz, the former Minister of Defense, in the previous Law and Justice government. Right?
Absolutely.
Just for the sake of our international viewers who might not be familiar with the intricacies of the Polish politics.
Absolutely. So this is one of the most important vice chairman of the Law and Justice Party today, who was a senior member of the government about 8 years ago. So we are talking about situations before 2020, before 2022, in situations where Law and Justice just took over power in 2015 and took it from it. And took the government onwards. And one of the big decisions that Macierewicz took at the time included, for example, banning all the contracts that the previous government took with Western European companies. And in this case, this was cited yesterday, that he blocked installation of a NATO component on the Polish soil. In effect, it was transferred to Germany.
So we're talking about the tanker aircraft, basically. So
yeah.
That's the question. Okay, so to what extent do you think the Polish law of evidence would make it possible to actually translate these accusations into something more on a legal ground? Because what we do know is that it's often easy to make political statements, but then you actually have the burden of proof. And even as the investigation into Trump has shown, the Russian collusion investigation, it's often actually difficult to connect these dots. You might be thinking, okay, something's clearly not right here, but is it really collusion, or was it just inefficiency or bad decisions?
Or, for example, the way you interpret the Polish interests. So yes, it's a matter that is very difficult to prove from the legal point of view. But what we have seen yesterday is another accusation not in terms of diplomatic treason, but accusation against the palace of the Polish president of lack of cooperation in this investigation. Apparently, the President Duda's office basically did not want to talk to the investigators about what happened when Macierewicz was fired. Apparently, there are some questions about his, let's say, mandate. Who is giving him the mandate to represent whom exactly?
And another question, because this was also mentioned in this report, is the selection of certain organizations in the United States. They were supposed to represent the Polish interests, and according to the investigators representing the Commission, they turned out to be, if not exactly pro-Russian, then at least acting in a way which could further certain interests that would align with the Kremlin's interests. Now, my question is this, because these were apparently think tanks and organizations connected with the right-wing side of the American political scene. Do you think the problem lies with someone saying, let's hire a pro-Russian group to represent us, like consciously, or is it the problem that we were facing for a while, namely that some of the Republican political scene in the US, and also their supporters, like look at Elon Musk, for example, they have adopted a language that is very different from the one from like the times of Ronald Reagan, for example, and which often seems to align, coincidentally or not, with that of the Kremlin on certain issues, such as Ukraine. Do you think this might have been a trap into which the erstwhile Polish authorities have fallen into, perhaps should have investigated it more?
Let me put it this way. There's a lot of speculation out there. And what we know is only a tip of an iceberg out there. So will we know more? Hopefully in time. But what we know for now, that the speculation, for example, about 2016, look, if Russian propaganda or Russian networks were operating for some political motives back in 2016, there were speculations that, for example, Russian propaganda was very important for the Trump win in 2016. And there were some reports after 2016 which were saying that that Cambridge Analytica was doing different kind of propaganda sponsored by, potentially, by Kremlin somewhere in the world. And some people were saying maybe it was about Mr. Duda's elections in Poland 2015 without any proofs of that.
Do we have any evidence, looking at the political scene more broadly, which would suggest that any political party in Poland has actually ever been aligned with the Kremlin? I'm asking because in Western Europe, in many cases, these situations are there. We have the Alternative für Deutschland in Germany, we have Viktor Orban. So they're actually making decisions which even in the light of what's going on in Ukraine, might actually be helpful or conducive towards certain interests of the Kremlin. What is the situation in Poland in this regard? Has there ever been any indication that anyone is actually following such a pattern?
Not a political party. But an individual, yes. So there were cases, for example, a former Samoobrona self-defense political party member who was actually convinced. He was basically. I think he's in the prison right now for the treason. So, but political system here is not pro-Kremlin. There's nobody here who is pro-Moscow. Is it the government or opposition? No, none of those parties are pro-Russian.
A couple of far-right MPs.
Look, but Confederacy, for example, yes. This is the biggest question out there. But there's no proof that that this party is taking anything from Moscow. What is going here is that they are grassroots nationalists. That's it. Grassroots nationalists whose political views are very similar with Russian propaganda, but that doesn't mean that they are Russian spies.
So now coming back to this report, what do you think could be the consequences thereof? Could it have an impact, for example, on the preferences of the electorate? Or will it simply mean that the respective supporters will become more entrenched in their views?
Look, we are in a full-fledged campaign without candidates. This is what happens in Poland right now. The campaign is for the presidential elections 2025, and the full swing is already visible out there. We don't have the candidates, but we have the campaign, and this is exactly what is going on here. This is an attempt by the government to pull issues from the past of Law and Justice that are very vulnerable for that party. And Macierewicz today is a vulnerable element because the decisions he took...
Quite controversial too, for a number of reasons.
They've been controversial in the past, but today they're making this party vulnerable in what kind of decisions they were taking that were pro-Russian, effectively. And this is what the government is putting on the table.
So to what extent do you think the political system can actually be secured against foreign interference? Now I'm talking about what we can do in the future, because we can see that Moldova, Georgia, they have been battlegrounds effectively between democracy and autocracy, with autocracy obviously being represented by the Russians. So do you think any sort of legislative reform, for example, would be necessary in order to prevent any such situations from happening, regardless who would be the so-called vehicle of interference?
Yes, there is plenty of ways to defend yourself, and a lot of those installments are in place, but they are much more effective today, post-2016, post-2015, in the world, where we learned from those incidents, also Brexit referendum in the United Kingdom. And today, for example, all the campaigns, which are propaganda campaigns, are stopped. I mean, you just informed people about Google and YouTube problem in Russia. But there's a big difference between what's going on in a country that is member of the European Union and the countries which are outside of the European Union. Because Moldova or Georgia, they don't have the same tools when we talk about those issues.
But we can still have alignment between certain leaderships, like, for example, Slovakia or Hungary, happening, whether organically or not, but maybe that's a different question. Still, very important issue there, and of course a developing story that we'll be looking at here on TVP World. Piotr Kaczyński was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm You're watching TVP World. Please do stay with us for more latest news and updates.